everybody, welcome back to the Claremont Classic Garage. Now that we know our CompAir mobile diesel compressor is a functioning unit, we're going to go ahead and start fixing it up, and it needs lots of fixing. We're going to start by getting some of the sheet metal off of it. It just makes it so much easier to work on it. It's all just held together with stove bolts. Whether they'll come out or not is entirely up for debate, but we're going to have a go at it. Well, that makes it a lot easier to get at everything, doesn't it? So we managed to get the rad out. I'm going to have to see if I can figure out what's wrong with it, like where it's leaking. The core doesn't look that bad, so maybe we can save it. Well, that's a lot easier, eh, with all that sheet metal off. I got the starter off, and after hunting and spending a lot of time on the computer, I finally did manage to come up with the right starter drive for it, or what we believe is the right starter drive. It's en route, so fingers crossed we ordered the right one. Now what I want to do is get the rest of the electrical stuff off of this thing, all this wiring harness and everything, so we can go through it. There's an oil temperature gauge that goes into the bottom of the compressor, and well, we'll see how much oil comes out when I pull that out of there. There's also some kind of a filter inside under this cap, so hopefully these bolts will come out. We can get this thing out of here and see what the heck we've got in there for a filter, and see if we could clean it, or even better, find a new one. This is all a mystery to me, this stuff. We got the cap off, and you can see here, this filter, it's just a screen. So it'll need to be all cleaned up, and then we can just put it back in. Now we're going to have a look inside it. I want to lash the valves. I looked it up, and this engine, this particular version of it, it calls for 12 thousandths of an inch intake and exhaust. Here's an interesting feature of this. You can see the intake manifold is integral to the valve cover and the head. Kind of different. You can see here's the intake portion of the cylinder head, or the manifold, and it's sealed off. Quite interesting. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to try and find top dead center of number one, and we can do that by taking the access cover off the side of the injection pump and watch for it injecting in number one. So we can see here that's pushed up, that's up on the cam. That means number one is injecting now. So now is when we can lash our valves. And let's see, this guy here seems a little tight, and that one seems, well, not too bad. That's the exhaust, that's the intake. On number one here, the intake was kind of tight, in fact, really tight, and the exhaust was pretty loose. But now we've got them both, so we've got a nice drag on our 12 thou gauge, which is what we want. Now, number two here, we've got, right now the intake valve is open, so that piston is on its way down. It's going to come back up and fire. So this one will be next in line. I guess the firing order on this thing is 1, 2, 3. That can't be hard to forget. So let's turn it here and see what happens. Okay, here's the number two intake valve coming back up. Holy moly. You should see the gap there on that exhaust valve on number two. Wow. Unbelievable. Okay, so both valves are up. So now it's coming up on compression. So we should see that injector. There it goes. There. So with that injector cam all the way up. We know now we could set the valves on number 2. And same thing, the intake is really tight and the exhaust is pretty loose. All right, that's number 2 done. Now we could go ahead and see about number 3. There we go. I've got all the valves lashed. I also, while I was in here, checked, made sure we've got no broken valve springs. Everything looks good, so we can drop the valve cover back on, tighten it up, and call that done. Now we could service it up. We're going to be changing the engine oil filter, and we're going to be changing the oil in the injection pump. So you see here these 2 plugs. That's the drain plug, and that's the level plug. And you could unscrew this breather up here and fill it up from there. So we'll be doing that. First thing we're going to do is get this filter off so that when we open the drain plug on the pump, it doesn't make a big mess. And then I guess the last thing we'll do is dump the engine oil out of it. I've pulled the 2 drain plugs out, and all I'm getting out is drips. So I kind of wonder if this pump was actually empty. Well, that's bad. I'm going to take the breather off and see if maybe I can get a little more air in there or something, but I'd say it's just empty. I think it's safe to say that our injection pump was completely empty of oil. Wow. And out comes the oil. Gonna have to see what I can find to put in this. I'd like to put something good in it. I think I've got a bucket of T6 Rotella kicking around here somewhere. We'll put that in it. I also would like to point out that in the previous video, I mistakenly referred to this as an oil cooler. Apparently it is not. It is a charge air cooler that cools the air coming out of the compressor to condense water out of it or something like that. The information on this thing is really hard to find, but that's what I gathered from reading. This is actually a charge air cooler. This here, it does have an oil cooler element in it that is not being used in this one. So I guess if we wanted to, we could circulate the oil from the compressor through here, or we could even circulate the engine oil through here. But the manufacturer of the thing decided that wasn't necessary, so we're not going to worry about it. Drain plug is back in this. Now we're going to use a wee little funnel and fill this thing up with some motor oil from the top until it runs out the drain plug, or until it runs out the fill plug. Then I guess it's happy. There you can see oil running out the fill plug. So, well, she's full. Drain plug is back in and our new oil filter put on. Now we could go ahead and fill her up with some T6 Rotella. It also needs the oil in the compressor unit filled up, but I can't do that until I do the electrical stuff, because the sensor for the oil temperature gauge goes right in the bottom of it, and I can't put the oil in it until I've got that thing back in. No problem. Now we can start working on the cooling system. The radiator was in a little bit of rough shape. We'll go over what we had to do with it. First off, the drain. It used to drain through this cast iron elbow and out the drain cock here, but you can see the cast iron elbow is just a little plug. So we got rid of that and replaced it with a brass one. Then the filler neck was loose. It was busted off. So we got that soldered back on, and the overflow little pipe here was completely, sorry, there, it's in frame now. The overflow pipe was completely crushed and it had become broken off the filler neck. So we've got that all back together now. I've got the top and bottom bungs or inlet outlet plugged, and we're gonna fill it up with some water and pressurize it and see if we can see where the heck it's leaking and if we can fix it. Well, I've got it filled with water right up to here, and so far I don't seem to see any leaks. I'm going to let it sit like this, and if it passes the atmospheric pressure test for a few minutes. I'll get the little pump thing out and we'll pump it up and see if it holds pressure. Well, there we go. You can see right there we've got a crack. So we'll have to get that cleaned up and solder that up, and then we'll try again. Our crack is right down in here, well, somewhere. That might be it right there. I might have to pump this thing back up now that I can see what I'm doing, and put a little bit of my leak detector fluid on there and see what I see. Yeah, our crack is right down in this groove here. You can even hear it. I put my fingernail in there. So we're going to have to try and get this cleaned out so it's shiny brass, and then we'll see if we can solder it up. Okay, that doesn't seem too bad. I'm going to pump it up now with the little pump, and we'll check it with our stuff there before I try putting the water back in it. All right, well, it ain't the prettiest thing, but it's not leaking. It's pumped up and it's holding. So we're just going to let it sit like that for a little bit and make sure we don't see any water coming out anywhere. And if we don't, I guess it can go back in. Now I can drop the radiator in. You get the two bottom bolts started into it and just leave them loose. And then you see these holes are slotted, so that thing just slides in. And then you swing the top of it in and put the other two bolts in. At least that's how it looks like it works. Once that's hung in there, I'm going to get the cooling fan attached back to the water pump. Hope I wasn't supposed to do that before I put the radiator in. Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? And then we got to hang the belt over the pulleys if we can put the shroud on. Okay, we got it. It just squeezed in between the rad and the end of the water pump, and we were able to get the bolts in. It's not every day you need the old snap-on cooling fan wrench, but when you need it, it's nice that you have it. Now, despite going through that, and that, and that, I couldn't really find any hoses that were just, I could just cut or whatever and put on. The thing with them being different sizes on both ends is really throwing it for a loop. So I sat the other night and I went through the Dayco hose catalog, and they do have illustrations of all the hoses that they make. There's thousands of them. I sat there for hours going through them all. But I think I found a pair of hoses that'll work. The top hose hopefully will just go on. The bottom hose may need a little bit of work. But anyway, they're coming. Fingers crossed I'll be able to do something with them. So for now, what we're going to do is I need to get the thermostat housing all buttoned up. We got to cut a new gasket for it. I broke one of the bolts when I took it apart, so I got that extracted. And we got to find another bolt in there, metric. So we'll get that all back together. Then we can put the alternator on. I got a new alternator for it because the old one didn't work. Whether there was something wrong with it or something wrong with the wiring, I don't know. We'll just put a new one on it and go from there. The two rad hoses I ordered showed up, so we're going to go ahead and see if we can do something with them. The upper one looks promising. The lower one, well, it can't be any worse than what we had before. I was just going by pictures, so let's see what we've got here. Yeah, it looks like we ought to be able to do something with this upper one. Time to start cutting. All right, well, we got the top one on. Let's see what we can do about the bottom one. I couldn't find any kind of hose with the bends in it that this one needs that was 1 3/4 on one end and 1 3/8 on the other end. How it was when I got it, it had this piece of 1 3/8 hose. Actually, I think it's 1.5 inch hose, which is wrong on there. And then this guy went on the bottom of the rad, and it was clamped over that like a double hose. So that's one way of doing it. Here's the hose I got. It actually would kind of reach from the radiator up to the water pump. We've just got this, like they've got that situation with the double thickness. So I'm going to work on right now, at least getting this, not going to worry about needing the double thickness there. And I'm just going to get this hose kind of trimmed so it at least fits in there, and we'll go from there. The lower hose, there wasn't much really I could do except put it on the way they had it. So this smaller hose has got a piece of steel pipe inside it, and the larger hose is clamped over both of them. I put a bunch of glue inside there to help it, so the pressure doesn't push it off. That should be okay. And it's clamped fine on the bottom. We've got clearance to the engine block so it doesn't wear through like the old hose did. So that's our hoses. I'm not going to put the coolant in it right now because there's a lot of junk in the water jackets. I got to get some cooling system flush, and we're going to, once we've got this thing up and running again, we're going to give it a flush, and then we'll drain everything out of it and put new coolant in. First thing we got to do, there is an oil pressure sender that goes in here, but what we're going to do is put in a T, because I want to put an oil pressure gauge in there just so I could kind of keep tabs on what it's doing. There we go. That's pretty cool. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to try and come up with some kind of a plug for this here block heater. It's kind of an odd shape. Most of the ones I've got around here are kind of the V shape. But we're going to see if I've got something, maybe one of them V ones. If the pins are kind of on the right center to center distance, I could maybe trim the rubber down and get it shoved in there. We'll find out. There we go. It took a little bit of dinking around, but we got it. It's hooked up. It's grounded. And then once I got some more stuff, I'll zip tie it to something so it doesn't get yanked and come off. It's good. And then, of course, once we get it full of coolant, we'll have to make sure that it works. Now we're going to change the starter drive. Or at least we're going to try to change it. We got to get the solenoid off. And I'm not sure. Oh, the fork will probably come off with it. So we'll undo the solenoid. And hopefully we just have to take these two screws out and the whole tail cone will come out. There's a little retainer or a stopper for this thing, and then a little clip that holds it on. Once we get that off, then our starter drive just comes off. Now, before we get too carried away, let's make sure our new one actually fits. Okay, that's good. So now what we can do is go ahead, get this thing all cleaned up, and then we could start reassembling the starter. Because I ended up having to take the whole thing apart. So now, although I was trying to avoid it, I'm going to have to do battle with the brushes to get them all back over the commutator here, but we'll get it. Well, we got this much of it back together. Now we'll slide the tail housing over, and it should be okay. Alrighty, there she is, all back together. Now we can go ahead and put it back on the engine. I went ahead and installed the fuel shutoff solenoid and the inlet line to the injection pump. This thing is gravity fed. It's quite simple. There's nothing on the pump to turn the engine on and off. You turn the engine off by shutting off the fuel supply. So that's what this solenoid does. It's normally closed, so in its relaxed state, no power on it, it's closed. It won't let fuel flow to the engine. When you turn the ignition on, it energizes it and creates a flow path to the engine. That's how that works. And it is hooked up to the safety switches. There's a hot switch and an oil pressure switch through a relay. This thing gets its power through that relay. And so if it loses oil pressure or gets too hot while it's running, it closes the valve, shuts the engine down. Here's our instrument panel, or our control panel. We're going to go ahead and do a little work on this. The 2 gauges on the left, I'm going to replace them. I've got new gauges for it. We've got a new ignition switch because this one's got the key busted off in it. We'll replace that. We need to do something about the generator light here. Or the alternator light, pardon me. And then we'll just generally kind of clean up and repair, replace, fix up the wiring as required. And it should be good to go. That looks nice with our new gauges installed, new ignition switch. The only thing I can't find is the lens for the alternator light. It was never there. I'll see if I can come up with something just to kind of cover that up to protect it. And in the meantime, we can start hooking up some of this stuff. The wiring on the back of this all seem to be pretty decent, so we're going to stick with it. No sense rewiring the whole thing for nothing. Here you can see we've got all the wiring back hooked up and secured. This plug had some nasty looking terminals in it, so there was only 4 things that went through it. So I just replaced them with some bullet terminals on each individual wire. So now what we're going to do is see what works and doesn't work. First, we're going to make sure we got no sparkies. That's good. Oops. There we go. Okay, so I did find a little kind of rubber thing that I can use as a lens on our generator light. So we can put the ignition on. You can see that lights up. That's good. It lights up too when we glow it. I guess it puts the ignition on when you glow it. Now I got the test light here hooked up to the glow plugs with a jumper wire, so we'll just make sure that it, yeah, there. So we know the glow plugs are working. Now the last thing we need to check, our starting, or I guess run. We need to check the run. So it's got this Murphy relay in here. That basically that's the engine protection. If it loses oil pressure or gets hot, this relay, the coil grounds through this switch or the hot switch, and it opens the points on the relay. It's a normally closed relay, and it kills the ignition feed to the fuel solenoid here, and the engine should stop. Now, we got the thing in run. It's in run. The push-pull is pushed into run, out to stop. Now, you have to push this button to bypass the Murphy relay to allow the fuel solenoid to open so you can get the thing running and let it build up oil pressure. Then you can release that. So if I push this button, I should hear this thing click. And well, what do you know? No click. And we can test it. We could take this straight to the battery, and you can hear it clicking. So something is wrong with this circuit. We're going to go ahead, pull the relay down, see if we can open up and diagnose what's wrong with it. So we pulled the marsh relay down, and you can see now we've got it working. You can hear that thing clicking away. You can hear the relay in there clicking away. What I found was, you see this fuse here, it had a bad connection on these terminals. So now that I know I've got it working, I'm going to take the fuse back out, clean those terminals nicely, treat them with some with some conductive grease, and that should be okay. The only thing I don't like is this thing here. Our push-pull switch, it is live all the time. It is connected to the wrong terminal on the back of this. It should only be live when the ignition is on, yet it's live all the time. So we'll fix that first, and then we will deal with this. Okay, so that's all done. I moved the power supply to the ignition side of the switch instead of the hot side of the switch. And now you can see here, push the button, nothing happens. Put the ignition on, we get all our clicking back. Pull the push-pull to the stop position, nothing happens. Push it in, all back to life. Okay. That should do it now. I'll get this back together. And now I've got to start putting the body back together, I guess, so I can hang the fuel tank off it. And we can see if she'll run. This here is the oil filter for the compressor. It's a reusable one. So we cleaned it up, gave it a good blowout. So we'll put that back together, and then we can put the sending bulb for the temperature gauge in and fill this thing up with oil. Just like that. Now I'll fill it up with oil once I figure out what kind of oil it needs. If you look at the decals on it, there's about kind of conflicting information about what oil to put in it. CompAir Canada tells you one thing, and Hydrovane tells you another thing. Or these are just, they're just trade names for the different oils, right? But I saw here Shell Rotella SX40. So they're telling you to put straight 40 oil in it, right? So I made a decision a long time ago to try and streamline the amount of lubricants that I've got around here. This oil for this thing, that oil for the other thing, another oil for something else. So this is going to have that applied to it. So we're putting in just 540 T5 Rotella that we put in the engine, and we use in a lot of other things around here. I don't think it'll hurt it. Will it? And as far as capacity, I have no idea. It says fill it up till it overflows, like an old lawnmower engine, right? So we're going to fill it up till it's right there. Okay, there we go. It just barely overflowed, and we can put the plug back in and tighten it up good. And man, I think we're just about done. Okay, so we're all set here. So with that, I'm going to leave you. We've still got quite a bit to do in the kind of the last video, but it's not bad. We'll get it done, and we'll have a really nice little piece of equipment when we're done, won't we? Anyway, thank you for tuning into our channel. We're marching onward toward 5,000 subscribers. That's going to be a huge deal for us here. And if you haven't already, please become one of them. Please subscribe to our channel. We'd love to have you as a regular viewer, and we'll keep all this stuff coming for you. You never know what we'll be doing around here. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you'll come back again. And until then, I'm Kevin saying so long from the Claremont Classic Garage.